Posted by you/dragons5. What is the creepiest, most unexplained thing you have ever experienced? When my brother and I were around 4/5, we lived in a house that was about 100 years old. One day we were walking up the stairs when we saw a tall man in a black coat and top hat walk into the living room, which was to the left of the bottom of the stairs. A bit freaked out, we thought our dad was pranking us, so called out for him. Shit. Both parents came out of the kitchen, opposite side of the stairs, and isolated from the living room. I hadn't thought about it for a long time and we never spoke about it. Then about a month ago, my daughter asked if I believed in ghosts, so I told her the story. Seconds later my phone bleeps. It was my brother saying, I was just talking to, partner, about paranormal shit, do you remember the guy in the top hat? This was eventually explained but fits the criteria for creepiest experience. When I was about 7 or 8, I was laying in bed trying to sleep through a brutal thunderstorm. I was the only person sleeping on the second story of a 150-year-old farmhouse. The house creaked and settled and was thoroughly terrifying to me as a child, so much so that I usually slept with the lights on. I just knew there were legions of ghosts and monsters ready to attack me. So this thunderstorm wasn't doing anything for my nerves. I finally got to sleep but was awakened by deafening thunder. I looked up to see the wall near the foot of my bed with blood streaming down it. All the nightmares were coming true. The problem was, I wasn't allowed to leave my bedroom. My parents had gotten tired of hearing that I was scared. So I laid there all night watching the blood drip down from the ceiling. Paralyzed with fear. Finally, morning came and I went barreling out of the room to get my parents. I pictured one of those moments like in IT where only I can see the blood, but no, my parents could see it too. It turns out that after 100 or so years, the dark red bricks of the chimney were dissolving and the dust from them formed a sludge in the rain. I got a phone call around 2 a.m. from a private number. I answered it and a low voice told me they needed help, was on the bathroom floor too sick to move. I thought it was my brother, so I rushed over to his house and he had no clue what I was talking about. We then both called the rest of our family to try to find who needed help. No one did. I hope whoever called me that night got the help they needed. My patient died on the wing I work on. She was terminal but not expected to go immediately. She was going to a facility with hospice, after a fairly long battle with cancer. She was scheduled to go early the next morning, her husband had planned on meeting her there, everything was set up. She was in good spirits, and her assessment was fine. Took her medications and said she was going to watch the news and then take a nap. An hour later I go to check on her, I'm quietly checking her for, making sure her stuff is in reach, moved her table, and then noticed she was gone. Sitting up, holding on to the side rail. She honestly looked like she was sleeping, but no heartbeat and no respirations. Most of the time when people expire their mouth drops open and it's very obvious. With her? Nope. I had to call a coworker to confirm. I was expecting a wake up, but she was gone. Attempted to contact her husband who I couldn't reach and started the paperwork, in addition to attending to my other patients. A few minutes later, I'm by the central desk and someone asks, "Where were you?" And I told them I was giving medication down the hall. I see two of the other nurses exchange looks, but nurses are weird, and since they didn't elaborate I continue on my nightly duties. I'm at the very end of the hall doing some patient education and the charge nurses come and get me. I assume the husband is calling back, but that wasn't the case. Have I been caring for my other patients at the opposite end of the ward? There have been phone calls coming out of the deceased patient's room to the central station. Several of them, no answer, just breathing. I mean, this has to be a prank, right? The phone rings. I look and see the patient's room number on caller ID. I walk into the room. The phone is neatly on the bedside table, TV is off, and the deceased patient looks like she is napping. I check the bathroom, it's empty. I'm going to leave the door open, halfway, I say as I leave the room. No more phone calls. But the next hour, alarms go off in empty rooms, call lights to come on for patients that can't move, an important piece of equipment died. And the dementia patient keeps complaining about the other patient that keeps coming into her room, loosely fitting the description of the deceased. Husband finally comes to the unit, because he knew why I was calling. He spends a few minutes with her and when he comes out of the room he finds me and says, "She told me this morning she didn't ever want to go to a nursing home." Well, I guess she meant it. After that, everything returned to normal. Well, normal as far as hospitals go. When I was around 5 years old, I woke up and saw a glowing white man-like silhouette pacing back and forth down the hallway, but kind of gliding. Freaked me the fuck out and I thought I was having a nightmare or something. I told my parents about it the next day, and my mom got a really weird look on her face, My brother had seen and told her about the same thing 2 weeks before, and I hadn't known about it. Still weirds me out. My house sitting story. 2 months after my brother and his wife bought a new house, they had to go out of town and needed their cats fed. Their house and my office are both a good drive from my apartment, but only a few minutes away from each other. My brother said if I wanted, I could just stay over in the guest room rather than driving among the 3 places. So I got the keys and instructions. I was staying there 3 nights, Monday to Wednesday. Monday evening was uneventful until about midnight. I was lying on the living room couch, watching Conan, with a cat lying on my chest. I started to drift off to sleep. The next thing I knew, I was standing in pitch black darkness. I completely freaked out, I had no idea where I was. I felt around in the dark and felt nothing. Finally, I realized there was a faint blue light coming from above. I moved toward it and then understood where I was. I was in the fucking basement. The light was coming through the basement door at the top of the stairs, which leads to the kitchen. Just enough moonlight made it through from a window elsewhere in the kitchen. I bolted up the stairs, turned on the kitchen light, and closed the basement door. I was terrified until I calmed down enough to come to the conclusion you probably already came to. I had sleepwalked down the stairs, after opening the basement door, which I know was closed. A couple of things are important to the story. The first is the basement. The house was very nice, actually, more than they should have been able to afford. The only exception was the basement. I had only seen the basement once when I first got the tour. It was unfinished and was the one major thing they wanted to fix up. All they had down there were some boxes and the washer/dryer. I had no reason to want to go down there and had kind of forgotten it existed. The other point is that sleepwalking is kind of a thing in my family, almost an inside joke. My brother talked in his sleep constantly and would sleepwalk sometimes, and it always scared the hell out of me. The idea of people doing things in their sleep just creeps me out to the core, still does. My brother knew this and would tease me about it, so it was known in my family that I had this phobia. But as far as I know, I had never, ever sleepwalked until that night. The image kept playing in my mind, over and over, of me, asleep, getting up from the couch, walking to the kitchen, opening the basement door, and shuffling down the stairs into total darkness. Creepy as all hell. Anyway, I saw the TV was still on in the living room, playing Wedding Crashers. I watched the rest of the movie, trying to laugh and think of the sleepwalking as a funny story to tell my brother. When I went upstairs to go to sleep in the guest room, I stayed asleep. That was night 1. The next morning, in the light of day, it didn't seem that scary. I texted my brother about it and joked around. All day I wasn't bothered one bit. But as I'm walking out of my office to my car, I'm overcome with this sense of dread. All of a sudden, the thought of going to sleep in that house, and maybe sleepwalking again, is scaring me. So I had a plan. I stop at the hardware store and pick up one of those rubber door stopper wedges. At the house, I jam this into the crack under the basement door and kick it in until it's as far as it can go. I test out trying to open the door, and it won't budge. Perfect. Later, I go upstairs and fall asleep. When I wake up, I swear to God I think I'm dreaming. I was standing in darkness again, but this time I know exactly where I am. The smell is the same. The concrete floor under my feet is the same. I look around for the light from upstairs, and it takes me longer to find it because it's farther away. Last night I was only a couple of feet from the stairs, this night it was maybe 10 feet. I run up and turn on the kitchen lights. I see the rubber wedge on the floor, a couple of feet away, as if tossed there. Again, I can't stop picturing myself sleepwalking. Out of the bedroom, down the stairs, trying to open the basement door. Bending down and yanking out the wedge. And then, again, slowly down into the darkness. I decided I was turning on the basement lights and they were staying on. I opened the door and flipped the switch to the basement stairway. I saw there was a main switch at the bottom of the stairs. To give you a quick sense of the layout, the staircase splits the basement into 2 parts. To the right is a small area with the washer/dryer, and to the left is the big open area. Anyway, I walked down and turned on the lights for the whole basement. That's when I noticed something I hadn't noticed when my brother gave me the tour. About 10 to 15 feet away, in the big area, there was a door to what looked like a small closet. This door was closed but had no doorknob, just an empty hole, so it looked like it would freely swing open. I realized it was very close to where I had just awoken. Then a fucking freaky thought came to me. It was as if each night I was heading to the door, and getting a little farther each time before I woke up. As soon as that thought popped into my head, I booked it up the stairs again, left the lights on, and closed the door. I went up to the bedroom, but it took me forever to fall asleep. That was night 2. The next morning, Wednesday morning, I woke up late for work. I didn't think about the basement at all because I was scrambling to get ready. At work though, I was still curious about what was behind the door, so I texted my brother and asked. He replied, "Wait, why were you in the basement?" I realized that when I texted him the day before, I never actually told him where I woke up. So I tell him I woke up in the basement, actually twice in a row. After a while, he sends this novel-length text. About how the basement is creepy, not to go down there, etc. How they tried putting the litter boxes in the basement and the cats made a mess in the house because they refused to go down. How he volunteers to do every chore other than the laundry so he doesn't have to go down there. He says all this stuff, and it's surprising to me, because my brother never believed in the paranormal or superstitions, ever since we were kids. I also realize he never answered my question about the door, but I let it go. After work, I get the same feeling of dread as I'm walking to my car. I don't want to stay there again, and I decide, fuck it, I don't have to. So I go feed the cats, get my stuff, and drive back to my place. I'm supposed to feed the cats one more time. So I'll stop over in the morning. As I went to sleep at my apartment, I was thinking of all the steps I would have to take to sleepwalk to the basement again, find my car parked around the block, drive asleep to my brother's house, etc. But this time, I sleep through the night. That was night 3. Thursday morning, I stop at the house as planned. I'm about to leave when I remember that the basement lights are still on. I don't even hesitate to go down to turn them off. There was something about being there in the morning that, at the time, made it seem fine. When I go down, again that door without a doorknob catches my eye, and it also doesn't seem scary anymore. So, what the hell, let's see. I walk over to it and I distinctly remember not feeling spooked at all. Until, I reach my hand toward the doorknob hole to pull it open. As soon as I do that, and I mean instantly, I feel this electric feeling, like the air before a storm, and I imagine a hand coming through that hole and grabbing mine. It was like 0 to 60, going from no fear to being certain that something horrible would happen if I opened that door. It's hard to describe it other than that electric feeling. I booked it up the stairs and out of the house. So, a month later, I meet my brother for happy hour. A few drinks in, we start joking about me sleepwalking in the creepy basement. I say he never answered me about what's behind the door, and he says I don't want to know. Joking at first, but then insisting. Finally, he tells me, and I don't believe him. He's my big brother and has only bullshitted me about 1,000,000 times in my life. This was his explanation. The previous, and first, owners of the house had a teen daughter that used the basement as her bedroom. The door was to her closet, where one night she curled up, took some pills, and killed herself. The family was going to remodel the basement, but after tearing it apart realized they couldn't do it and had to move. That was why only the basement was unfinished, and why my brother was able to afford the place. The seller had to disclose a suicide happened in the residence. He said if I didn't believe him, to look up the market values of the identical houses on his track. I know how much they paid for their house and it was way lower. He and his wife considered themselves rational people and figured it was a bargain, but didn't want to tell anyone. After they moved in, his wife was fine with the basement, but he grew to hate it. He apologized for not saying anything to me before I stayed there, but he never thought I'd have any reason to go down there. Now here's what convinced me. I said okay, the only thing that makes me kind of believe you is that the last morning I was there, I went over to the closet door, and at this point, I see my brother's face change, and I continued, when I went to open it, the air felt like and at the same instant, I say, electricity and my brother says electric. At the same time. I saw his face and knew he was telling the truth. I've never stepped foot again in that basement, and I haven't sleepwalked since. TLDR, house sitting alone at my brother's new house, sleepwalked into the basement and possibly felt the presence of a ghost. A twofer, many years apart at the same apartment. Young teen me. I never had much of a rebellious side to me, but my parents didn't want me in their bathroom when they weren't home. They, however, had a fantastic shower, as compared to the leaky pus I was stuck with. We'd had a minor spat this particular morning and they left to clear their heads. That meant it was time to use the fancy shower. Home alone extravagances are set pretty low when you're poor. Anyway, they'd been gone about half an hour, then I hear my dad stomp run into their room. He slammed his keys down and checked the answering machine, and I knew he had to have been pissed, so I called out my shower drain was leaking again. Sorry, I'll be out in a minute. Stomp run to the bathroom door, then it just stops. I called out to him and he starts jiggling and turning the handle like crazy. The door wasn't locked and he wasn't an invalid at all. So I stepped out, wrapped a towel around me, and began saying what the hell? As I opened the door. I opened it amid shake, watching the knob turn, and there was no one on the other side. I ran through the apartment and saw that we still had a message, and the front door was still locked. The parents came home 2 hours later. The other one was a happy creepy about 10 years later. I had a cat I adopted that was a real bastard. He would hiss, bat, and claw if you were lucky, bite if you weren't. Or, if you weren't me. He loved me. He'd frequently attack my family members, then hide in my lap and go to sleep. He had a long battle against stomach cancer and he finally passed. By the time he passed, it was just my mom and I left in the apartment, and she, in her way, missed him. About 2 weeks go by and I'm up late one night on WoW. I saw my cat walk down the hallway, so I instinctively reached down to pick him up to my lap. Towards the end he could barely move his hips, then I felt incredibly sad knowing that he wasn't there. That was enough to get me to log off for the night. A few seconds after I laid down, I felt a cat kneading right behind my back. I'm a side sleeper. I figured it was my brain messing with me due to tiredness. When I woke up, there was a little indentation on my blanket and a spot that was about 15 degrees hotter than the rest of my bed. I like to think it was him. He was a mean little bastard, but I hope he was happy with me. I used to work the opening shifts at McDonald's, so I would get up at 3:30 a.m. to get ready and get there on time. When I was in my kitchen having some cereal, I looked out the window to see headlights pointing straight into the kitchen window at me. It was on a cul-de-sac behind my house, no reason for anyone to be parked at that angle, especially that time in the morning. Whoever it stayed there as long as I was in the kitchen with the lights on. As soon as I finished eating and turned the lights off to go get in my vehicle, the car watching me backed up and started driving around to my house. When I got in my car, this vehicle was driving past me incredibly slow, about 5 miles per hour. I have never been so afraid in my life. My friend and I time traveled. Or that is the easiest explanation. We were in high school and he was taking my bus back to my house with me. We get home around 2:45 and my mother gets home around 3 o'clock. We decided to go hiking before my mother could say no, so we left a note on the counter and took off. We took our usual route up the backyard hill, making sure to avoid the crazy people that resided in makeshift homes up there. Climbed some trees for a while, explored a section of the car graveyard we hadn't checked out before, and other typical teenage exploring type stuff. We took a break near the top of the mountain. It was unusually beautiful that day. Incredibly green, and there were seriously visible light beams shining down through the canopy. Like seriously pretty stuff. So of course I start running around through the light and decide we should probably start getting back, cause my mother was probably gonna be pissed if we missed dinner. On the way back we stumbled onto a pond we had never encountered before. It was small and had a single wooden boat on it. There were also a few teepees around the pond. Not old teepees, they looked ratty and unusable. We decided someone was probably living there and took a new path back home. We climbed down and up an old quarry and dropped off on the main road that leads to my house. We were filthy and over a mile from my place. We just walked the road back to my house. We arrived home before my mother, which seemed strange, so I threw out the note so she wouldn't know we were out gallivanting. She got home like 3 minutes later wondering how we had gotten so dirty at school. She arrived home at her usual time and we had only been gone a total of 13 to 15 minutes. We honestly don't even talk about that day anymore. It's too confusing. But yeah, time travel. Okay, this is the go-to scary story that happened to me. When I was about 10 or 11 years old, I stayed up sort of late. When I got to bed, I was still feeling restless. I pulled all of my blankets around me and tucked myself against the wall. My twin bed was flush with the wall. I was in bed awake for probably an hour when I started hearing a rather unsettling noise. Muffled crying. I focused on it, hoping it was my imagination or I was asleep. After a few minutes, I needed to see what it was. I turned around in bed to see a woman in a dress standing at the far side of my room, crying into her hands. Her hair was matted and her clothes tattered. Oh, and she was about 7 or 8 feet tall, crammed under the ceiling. After a few seconds, she looks up at me and screamed, but it sounded like it was coming from far away. She made eye contact with me, turned around, and walked through the wall. I stayed awake that night. I've posted this before, and it's been a while, so see how my memory goes. I used to work at a place that required to be manned 24 hours a day. The reason being is that I handled sensitive documents/files, and if somebody needed this information in the middle of the night, I would have to fetch it for them, or confirm that I have it. Anyways, security is kind of tight. Bars on windows, multiple locked doors to get to where I am. They would give me work to do during the night but underestimated how quickly I could get it done. So like most nights, I finished my work in like 30 to 45 minutes and pulled out my phone and played games, Netflix and browse Reddit, since nobody else is in the building at night. So now it is getting to be the last third of my shift when all of a sudden I hear a door close. I look at the security camera and see someone walking down a hall toward my room. At first, I thought it was just somebody that came in, ridiculously, early, so I turn around and wait for them to come in. But nobody came in, and the hairs start rising on my back. Now, this isn't a really big building, so I figure I'll find the guy wherever he is and start checking offices and storage rooms but come up empty-handed. However, I do see that a fire door had shut. I go to try and rewind the camera, but the digital recording is password protected and I don't know the password. Anyways, the whole thing freaked me out, the way the person was walking down the hallway, like a determined walk right to where I was. So, I sit with my spine tingling for the last couple of hours of my shift, and finally, people start coming in, my replacement shows up and I tell her what I saw, and at this point, I figured I must have imagined the whole thing. I'm told to go home and the manager and girl who replaced me would look over the camera. After getting home, I call my manager and ask what was on the camera. So they said that the video showed the fire door closing, but then the video froze for about an hour. The next thing it records is me reopening the door.